Okay, so we want to welcome everybody tonight. Glad that you could all make it. And whoa, it's a little bit loud. Anyway, happy to have you not only in person but online, and hopefully we're not going to have any major technology issues tonight. We don't have a lot of videos and other stuff, and the plan is to kind of practice that in the future till we get it down to the point where it runs smoothly. So no worries. Tonight we're lucky to be able to listen to Pam Birrell. We've heard her before, and we're going to hear some more as time goes on. Clinical psychologist, previous professor, U of O. I don't know if you're always kind of a professor for life once you've been as long as you may have worked. I'm sure your students feel that way about you. Anyway, you're going to talk to us about managing stress tonight. And welcome. And we're going to turn it over to you. And maybe you could handle some of the questions they have, or Scott and I will do that to begin. All right.
Just want to pull up my PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Can you hear me without this? Or would you prefer I use it? Yes, use it. But why does it do that? If I walk way over here, no, it's still squealing.
Let's make sure this is off. Yeah. Okay, this one's off. Try it now.
Okay, no, it's still squealing.
All right, turn that one off.
I don't know how to turn it down. He only showed me on and off.
And let's
No, that's not on.
Okay, can you hear okay with this? Try this one.
How's this?
Much better.
That's much better. Okay, all right. Does it? Yeah, it does work. Okay. There we are.
And we could turn the lights off.
Just the front of the room, not the back of the room. Yeah, good. Thank you. Right. Okay, and where is your? That's forward.
Yeah.
And that's back. Okay, I can do it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, as Charlie said, my name is Pam Birrell, and I'm a psychologist and taught psychology at the U of O for many years. And also, I'm a very committed vegan at this point. I started my plant-based journey about 15 years ago, kind of by accident. I went on a raw diet 15 years ago because I had a friend who wanted me to do it. And I was on a raw diet for about a year, and I realized at the end of the year, oh, wait a minute, I'm vegan. Because there was raw cheese and raw milk, but I didn't want that. And so, and then I realized, you know, I'd lost a bunch of weight and I felt really good, so I never went back. And now I've really gotten involved in, especially concerned about compassion for animals. So when I retired from my private practice, I started working at an animal sanctuary where I go and I shovel shit every Wednesday morning and spend time with these beautiful and wonderful farm animals. So, and I'm very, very committed to promoting a plant-based lifestyle, all the animals at the farm. So tonight, though, I'm going back to my psychological roots and talking about stress and managing stress. And so we're going to begin with a little exercise. I want to get you involved. Okay. I went to Google and I Googled managing stress. And these are the things that came up: exercise, eating healthy, sleep, practice relaxation techniques, take time for yourself, connect with others, set limits, control your environment, plan ahead, and identify and challenge negative thoughts. And look at this list and talk to the other people at your table about what kinds of things work best for you in managing stress. What from this list is one that says that's what I need to do? Charlie.
Oh, I didn't share the screen.
Okay.
So, oh my word. I was more interested in trying to share you, and then I wound up Xing out your program, which I will get back here in a moment. Let's see. I want to go to
Okay,
the desktop.
continue talking among yourselves. Go.
Everybody kind of wants to talk. Where are we at?
Okay, there we are again. So think for a minute a bit through this list, and I hope you can see it all. And what kinds of things do you do when you're stressed? So talk to each other, and then I'm going to have you report back to the group. What works for you, what doesn't work for you, whatever.
Does that work? Ah, don't believe you, I'm sweating. Doesn't show her.
Yes, talk among yourselves.
It's like you.
What?
I just can't get that idea. You know?
Of course,
Go to
yeah.
the power
Feel free to participate.
Okay.
That's
Whatever.
Okay. Just have a seat and listen.
So I'm trying to follow you around.
Oh, okay.
With that camera.
Okay, so if I'm here, they can see me.
They can see you, and I'll try to track you around.
Don't worry about it. I'll try to stand in this area.
Okay.
I'm just wondering now because I'm not talking.
You're wondering what?
I'm wandering
Oh,
around.
you're wandering now because you're not talking.
Right.
I get it. Okay, great. Great. It's going well. Got a chance to talk to pre-med students yesterday at U of O. There were about 20 of them. It was fun. Spent an hour. And Sunday talking at Temple Beth on a panel discussion of veganism. So we're trying to get around and spread the word and see if we can bring a few more people this direction. Just keep working on it.
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
Yeah, it was not anything that, yeah.
Okay.
No, I would be extremely surprised based upon.
I'd like to pull you back to the main group now.
Be in any way
Okay.
receptive, but
So,
who knows?
and I would like some feedback. What works, what doesn't work for you? Just start shouting it out. I want to get you talking.
Yeah.
What? Deep
Good
breathing. Okay, that's one that works. What else? Social connection. Hugging your animals. That one really works. Yeah. All right. Dancing in the kitchen while she washes dishes. Anybody else have anything that maybe not on this list? Walking. Yeah. Yeah. Back there? Yeah. What? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Like a hot tub. Yeah. Actually, I got something recently called a sauna blanket. No, it's just, it heats up with infrared heat. It was a present. It was a gift from my daughter. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, Frank. What? Yeah, sex and cuddling. Good one. Yeah. Music. Yeah. Right. So these are all these ways, people have all different ways of managing stress because we live in a very stress-filled society, right? That we've always got to figure out, breathe deep, I've got to relax, I have to practice these relaxation techniques, I've got to make sure I've got a good diet, and I've got to make sure that I'm sleeping well and all of that stuff. Well, I'm going to change things up a little bit tonight, and we're going to look at stress from perhaps another side. But before I get there, we'll have a musical interlude to see if this works. Everyone knows that song, right? Well, we're going to look at stress from both sides. We've been taught really that stress is a very bad thing and we need to manage it and we need to avoid it. And I'm going to go back through a little bit of the history of how stress began. That's the whole field of stress studies. I'm trying not to be too academic, but that professor in me just sometimes kind of shoots through. So the field of stress studies began in 1936 with a man called Hans Selye, who basically tortured rats. And he did all kinds of terrible things to rats. He made them, he subjected them to extreme temperatures. He made them exercise for long periods of times. He almost drowned them. He would put them in water and they couldn't get out and all of this stuff. And what he found when he tortured rats is that they had extreme stress responses. They died earlier, they had high blood pressure, they tended to get more cancer, they became very neurotic. And so he called this stress. But the thing that we don't know about, one of the things that has happened is that we've applied these rat studies to humans wholesale. Well, first of all, people aren't rats. And second of all, the kind of stress that he studied, we're not usually subjected to. I really want to be clear tonight that I'm not talking about childhood trauma like I did last time. I'm talking about the kind of everyday stress that we all have. It could be that I had to go out and rake leaves off my sidewalk because I couldn't even see it today. Sometimes traffic, that's a big stressor for me. Having heavy traffic, or you have a disagreement at work or a problem with your housemate or your spouse. Those kinds of stress are the kinds of things I'm talking about, which weren't Selye's rats. They had much different kind of stress than that. But we picked up this whole field of stress from that. And things are changing. The way we're looking at stress is really changing these days. And I'm going to look at a more internal view of managing stress. The other thing that Selye proposed that we don't hear about is the difference between distress and eustress. He talked about distress as being the bad kind of stress, that it really makes us feel bad. But eustress is a good stress. And the best example of that you can think of is a violin and a violin string. I'm a flute player, I wish I was a violin player today, but if a violin string is strung too tightly, there's a lot of distress on it. It screeches, it sounds terrible, and it might break. But if it's wound too loosely and you draw the bow across it, it doesn't make a sound. And so it needs a certain amount of stress to make the music. And that's what we need too. Stress is a very hard thing at times, and sometimes we need it. We need to rise to the challenge. Rising to the challenge of something is actually very good for us. And we determine that really by what goes on inside of us. So this is the first mindset that we have about stress that we've gotten picked up from Celia's research, that experiencing stress depletes my health and vitality, experiencing stress debilitates my performance and productivity, experiencing stress inhibits my learning and growth, and the effects of stress are negative and should be avoided. And so even the title of this talk, Managing Stress, sets you in that mindset. But I left it there on purpose, that, okay, this is stress, this is bad stress, it's bad for me physically and performance-wise and learning, and we really need to avoid stress. So maybe stress is actually good for us. And there's a very good book, relatively new, called The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. And she reports some very, very interesting studies in terms of mindset, which they tend to illustrate what a mindset can do, how you think about something, what that can do for you. The first study was on housemaids and blood pressure. And in this study, a researcher, not Kelly, went to hotels where housemaids worked in hotels, and there were 7 hotels. And if you can imagine, being a housemaid at a hotel is a lot of exercise, right? You're lifting mattresses, you're walking around, you're, making beds, all of this stuff. But she would ask the housemaids, did they get much exercise? And about 70% of them said, no, I'm pretty sedentary. And so she took half those hotels and she gave the housemaids a little bit of an education, showing them how many calories were burned when you did housework and what good exercise and even aerobic exercise housekeeping could do. And she put posters up. She gave a 15-minute presentation. She put posters up at half of the hotels. The other part of the hotels, she didn't do anything. And then she came back a month later. And what she found is the housemaids who had been educated that their work was actually exercise, lost weight, and lowered their blood pressure. The housemaids at the other, where they hadn't been trained that, then their weight or blood pressure didn't change. So just think about what our minds can do and how powerful that is. And I know now when I make my bed at home, I'm exercising. And I went out and had to rake the yard today, and it's like, I'm exercising because, I want it to be good for me. So that was the first study. The second one had to do with milkshakes. And in this particular study, people were, and you'll find out social psychologists do all kinds of weird studies. But in this particular study, people were brought into the lab to sample test a milkshake. And they were brought back twice. During the first time they sampled the milkshakes, they were told that this is a super rich, wonderful, really just amazing milkshake. Very, very rich and thick, and really provides a lot of fat, a lot of calories. And they drank the milkshake. And then right after that, their ghrelin, which is a hormone that measures how full we are, was measured. Okay. And then they came back a month later and they were given a slender shake. which was 140 calories, tasted pretty good, but it's a kind of a diet shake. And they measured the ghrelin again. And what they found in this study is that but the participants got the same milkshake both times. So we fooled them again, right? And so then they measured how satiated did they feel. And when they were told it was a super rich milkshake, their ghrelin levels went down, went up, which means they were full, right? When they were given the slender shake, they went down because they're not full, because it's only a diet shake after all. So it turns out our minds then can really affect what hormones are released, what happens inside our bodies. It's really very, very interesting and very intense. And then there was another study done with job interviews, which this takes me back to my old social psychology days. We used to fool people all the time. You're brought into the laboratory. People are measuring your stress. So you've been given various ways to monitor stress. And you're being told that you're going to be in an interview, a job interview. They want to role play an interview. And so they go into this interview, but it turns out the people that are interviewing them are not very nice. And so they kind of look away, they contradict, they interrupt the person. So it's a very stressful job interview. And then the various hormones are measured. Now, in one condition, the participants are told that stress is actually good for you. Most people, this is going to be a kind of stressful situation, but stress can actually be good for you in these ways. In the other condition, they were told stress is really bad for you. And what they found was that there are two hormones that come up with stress. One is cortisol, and cortisol mobilizes our body to move, to mobilize fat, to turn it into sugar. It suppresses things like appetite. It's kind of part of the fight or flight express thing. And DHEA, I'm not going to even try to pronounce it, is a neurosteroid, which actually helps our brain to grow. And what they found in this study is when people were given the education that stress is good for you, and they were put in this stressful situation, their DHEA actually went up. And cortisol also went up, but not as much. In the study where they were told stress is bad, cortisol went way up and DHEA went way down. So these are such simple things. Look at the power that we have inside of us to change our lives. And the other, of course, is the simple power of the placebo. Any study of antidepressants or anxiety drugs or any kind of drug, you have to measure it against a placebo, because often it turns out the placebo is as powerful as the drug they're testing. And there's also some really interesting studies that have to do with IBS, where people are given a pill. Get this, they're given a pill for IBS, and they're told it's a placebo. It still works in a majority of the people. So the power of our mind, we tend to sort of discount the placebo effect and say, that's nothing, but it's really a very powerful inner mechanism. And so I've got a couple of quotes from Viktor Frankl here. He said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In that response lies our strength and our freedom. So what I'd like to spend a lot of time tonight is looking at what is in that space between stimulus and response. Let's say, for example, terrible traffic jam and you're trying to get someplace in a hurry. That's the stimulus. And what's your response? And not only your thinking response, but what's your body response? What comes in between that space? And this turns out to be very interesting. And so back to this mindset and the importance of mindset. What happens between stimulus and a response? Our minds do something called appraisal. We're constantly appraising our situation. So if you're in heavy traffic, you're in a hurry, it's raining, it's cold, and there are a bunch of idiots around you, right? Your mind is going to be thinking some things. Your mind is probably thinking about, this is terrible. Why don't these terrible people get out of my way? I have something inside of me, I call it my traffic vigilante. And she comes out, she doesn't like traffic. And she makes all kinds of comments. So you can feel if your mind is going, this is terrible, I just can't, I need to get there, this is awful. How does your body feel if you're thinking those things? Right? What if you're thinking something different? I'll get there when I can. We're all people that are trying to get the same place. I'll tell you a story about a client that I saw once, actually early on. She came in, very bright woman, and she came in with almost debilitating panic attacks. And she was really interesting. She was 40, around 40, but when she'd had her first panic attack back in college, and when she had her first panic attack, her dad gave her a Valium pill. And he said, if it ever gets bad, you can take this pill. She had carried that pill around for 25 years. She still had the same Valium pill because just in case she needed it. And she and I talked about, well, what happens? What happens when you're having a panic attack? What are you thinking? And she goes, I'm thinking I may end up in a state hospital. I'm thinking, do I take it now or not? And she had her life arranged. She couldn't go into the grocery store unless she had every stop planned out because she had to get in there and get out of there because she might have a panic attack. She had a terrible time driving over bridges. She'd just gotten a job in Springfield. That made her life difficult. So she'd have panic attacks on the way to work. She always sat in a classroom next to the door. So she was really being constrained by this panic attack and anxiety. And so we talked about, what do you think? And she's like, oh, it's awful. I'm gonna end up in a state hospital and all of this stuff. And I said, maybe there are other ways you can think. Actually, she was so bright. She came back the next week and she said, I'm wondering if how I'm thinking about these panic attacks might make me more anxious. And yeah, that might be the case. So we started coming up with other things she might think during her panic attack. And one thing we came up with, I said, well, how long does a panic attack last? And she said, well, it's never lasted more than 4 or 5 minutes. So I said, maybe one of the things you could think is it'll be over in 4 or 5 minutes if I just sit her quietly. And so we did a bunch of things like that where she changed her mindset about the panic attacks. And at one point, she was talking having a panic attack going over the bridge. And I said, well, why don't you just take that panic attack and put it on the seat beside you? So she did that. And she named it Fred and set it on the seat beside her and got around the bridge. And so her panic attacks started going away because you can imagine this power of this mindset. She came back a few years later and she said she decided she didn't want to get rid of the panic attacks altogether because she was a good artist and she used the panic and anxiety as kind of a prime the pump for her creativity. But she said after a few years, the panic attacks went away altogether. And that's just the power of how she was thinking about them. Our minds can make us more upset or they can help cool us down. And we have the power to change our response to stress and make it a source of energy and meaning. One of the things we know about PTSD is that if you've had a really bad experience, terrible traumatic experiences, you can develop PTSD. And when there's a traumatic experience, there's a tremendous spike in cortisol and stress response all over the body. And there was one study that was done where people came into a trauma center after an accident and their cortisol measures they measured their cortisol levels. And then after a few months, the people came back and some of them had developed PTSD. They had all the classic symptoms of PTSD. They were avoiding situations where they might be something like what had happened in the accident. They couldn't remember parts of the accident or whatever had happened. And so they developed classic symptoms of PTSD. Interestingly enough, what they found is that the people who had the highest levels of cortisol at the time of the trauma had the lowest levels of PTSD later. And so it's like our body really response. And if we can be there, and I'll get more to this later, we can really be there when our body is responding, because it's supposed to. It's got these great responses to stress, but then they can go down. But where if you're trying to suppress your stress response all the way, all the time, then it can keep going underground. And actually, sometimes they're using now cortisol injections to help treat PTSD, kind of get your body back in that state. And we often think that when stress happens, we go into something called fight or flight. How many people have heard of fight or flight? How many have heard of tend and befriend? Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Because our body has a couple of responses to stress. One is cortisol, which is this fight or flight, adrenaline. I've got to get out of this situation. If a tiger walked in this room right now, we would have a fight or flight response, and that would be very, very appropriate. But in our culture today, we rarely have tigers walking into the room or snakes crawling across the floor. It's more about the person next to me looked at me funny, or I have to go to the bathroom, or whatever it is. They're usually responses or situations like that. And there's two hormones that are related to stress. One is cortisol, which is an adrenaline, which, get me out of here, the tiger's here. But the other one is called oxytocin, which has been called the cuddle hormone. Actually, I found out that you can order sniffs of oxytocin online. Because it's the love hormone, it calms you down, it makes you seek connection. It's the hormone that gets really raised when a woman is breastfeeding. That is just the love connection. And so for a lot of people, their response to stress is tend and befriend. So if a tiger walked into the room, we might want to run, but there might be some of us who'd want to huddle together, that want to protect each other, which want to work with each other and try to figure out ways to get through it. So we have these two hormones that come up during stress. And again, a lot of that is determined, which hormone comes up can be determined. Part of it's gender related, but part of it can be determined by our mindset. So I'm back to mindfulness. I know I did this before, but this one, so there's a space between stimulus and response. Most of us just kind of react automatically. And to widen this space between stimulus and response, to be able to look at what kind of appraisal we're making of a situation, we need to have a way to look at ourselves, a way to take a space. And mindfulness is a very, very, very important skill in life, as far as I'm concerned. And it takes practice. A lot of people will say, well, I can't meditate. And I just want to sock them, because I'm not talking about meditation. That can help. If you want to sit on a cushion for 30 minutes a day in silence and you like that, fine. But mindfulness is much more than that. Although sitting still, which I'm going to have you do in a few minutes for 3 minutes, might be helpful. And 3 minutes a day, that won't take much. In fact, I think I'll do that now. All right, so I'd like you to, could you turn off the lights in the back part of the room too? And we're going to do a little mindfulness exercise. Okay, so I'd like you to sit comfortably, feet on the floor. If you're comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. If you're not comfortable with that, and sometimes traumatized people aren't, just look softly down toward the floor and just take a deep breath. And take one more deep breath through your nose and let it out through your mouth in a sigh. Okay. And then close your mouth and pay attention to your breathing. Notice how the air is cool when it enters your nostrils. And notice how the air is warm when it leaves your nostrils. Maybe you can begin to notice the air as it moves down your throat. cooler going in and warmer coming out. Perhaps you can become aware of your rib cage and your chest rising on the inhale and sinking back on the exhale. And just observe the breath from the tip of the nose down into the bottom of the lungs. Make no attempt to control it. And imagine now that as you breathe in and the air reaches your lungs, you can feel the oxygen, the energy going from your lungs to your fingertips and to your bottom of your feet as that life-giving oxygen enters your bloodstream. You can feel the energy moving to where you're seated on the chair, to your knees and elbows. Maybe you can become aware of the breath as it moves up and down the spine. And see what else you notice about the room, what's going on around you. Notice what you're hearing, other than my voice, the sounds you might be hearing in the background. Maybe you'll notice your back as it rests against the chair. Maybe you'll notice where your hands are resting. Let yourself really notice, even with your eyes closed, the world around you. And now begin to notice your thoughts. Meditation and mindfulness is not about stopping thoughts. Never, ever, ever. First of all, it'll never happen. And second of all, our minds are all about thinking. But we don't need to get involved with our minds. Just watch them. Here comes a thought. My butt hurts. Or maybe a thought comes up of, oh, come on, why did you get over this? This is boring. Maybe you have a thought of, oops, I forgot to do X today. Or tomorrow, you're already thinking about what's happening tomorrow. And so now I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. I'm going to play a little bit of music for you to just sit in this very open, aware, accepting. This is a space that accepts everything. It accepts discomfort. It accepts your thoughts. It accepts tension that you might have. I'm not trying to relax you. It just is accepting everything and neutrally observing everything. Okay. Welcome back. How do you feel? You're in a space now of mindfulness. You're probably not good at it. I've been a meditator for, I don't know, 40 years. I'm still not good at it. But we can expand that space inside of us, that space between stimulus and being aware of that space between stimulus and response. And it's something that takes a lot of practice. But if you want to get good at playing the piano, do you just sit down and play? And you get up and say, I can't do that? We all know that anything worth doing takes practice. And I was telling a friend of mine about this mindfulness practice and that stuff. And she came back a couple weeks later and she said, you know, I sat down 5 minutes a day in my chair and did that. And it's made a huge difference. So give yourself 5 minutes a day to just listen to a piece of music like that or sit in silence in that open, neutral, observing space. And you will get better at it. And don't you feel kind of like, okay, I feel like a nap right now. Okay, another quote from Viktor Frankl. When we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And that's kind of what I'm talking about tonight. We can't change the traffic on the road. We can't change the fight with a coworker. We can't change, oh my God, they moved up the deadline of that project. Can't change those things. But we can change how we internally deal with them. So one of the things we can learn is, as part of our mindfulness practice, is distress tolerance. Bad things are going to happen, right? We're going to have a traffic accident. We're going to have a fight with our partner. All kinds of bad things can happen. And we're going to have pain from those events. We're going to have an internal stress response. We're going to feel bad if somebody hurts us. We're going to feel bad if we narrowly miss a traffic accident or get in a traffic accident. So those things are going to happen. And if we can't tolerate that kind of pain, that kind of upsetness that happens, then we push it down. And we tend to develop a longer stress reaction to it then, because we don't feel it. We don't let all those hormones move, because they're going to move. We just can really feel into it. So we need to develop this distress tolerance, because if we just act impulsively without that space between stimulus and response, then it's really not mindful. So this distress tolerance is the ability to perceive the environment as it is without demanding that it be different. This is not to say we shouldn't try to change injustice in the world, that we shouldn't try to change things that we see that are wrong in the world. But if you're in a traffic jam, no amount of thinking and trying to get around and sneak around people and get yourself into a bigger jam is going to help. You're in a traffic jam, nothing's going to help. And as long as you're trying to change an unchangeable situation, you are suffering. If I keep going back to traffic. If you've had a really bad day at work, nothing's going to change that. You had a bad day at work. But if you keep trying to think, oh, maybe I could change it, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that, then you start suffering. But if you can just feel, my God, that was a crappy day at work. That felt terrible. Then again, we kind of enter that mindful state of, yeah, that was a terrible day and I feel really bad about it right now. And that's no longer suffering. That's just, yeah, that's just the pain of what happened that day. That's all that it is. And that will change. But you're not tightened up around it. I think I'm trying to, it's like loosening of the mind. So the mind's not hanging on so much. And the other thing is, and I've had so many people, I had 40 years of doing psychotherapy. I had so many people tell me, because I worked with highly traumatized people. They would tell me, I can't start crying because I'll never stop. And I told them, nobody has ever died from crying. But I think some people have died from not letting themselves cry. And I can absolutely guarantee you, there is not a case on record anywhere in the history of the world of someone who couldn't stop crying the rest of their life. You can let yourself feel your feelings. It's a really important skill. It doesn't mean you have to do anything. You can just sit and cry. The important thing about letting these feelings come through is not to feed them. Okay, best way to feed a feeling is to go in your mind and start telling yourself stories about this feeling. So your feelings are hurt. You've had a bad day. Somebody barked at you at work. You felt terrible about it. And you find yourself feeling really awful about it and crying and saying, I don't know why that person did that. I'm going to get back at them tomorrow. They keep doing that all the time. You know, I need to get out of this situation. You can see the mind going and going and going, which feeds that feeling and makes it bigger. But if you can just sit and feel how hurt you feel, that's all. That's all. Just go with that. Let your body feel how hurt you are. Let your body feel the pain in your heart. Let's say you're really angry. You don't need to go hit a pillow. Actually, studies have shown that if you go hit a pillow when you're angry, you get angrier, right? But you can just sit and feel the heart racing or the jaw tightening of anger. I'm really angry. That's all you do. And study after study after study, I can tell you, the feeling will go. You don't have to be in it forever, but don't feed it with stories about it or thoughts about it. Just let the feeling be there, like we just did a few minutes ago. I've been crying now for, I think the longest crying job I ever had was maybe 10, 15 minutes. That's a long time to cry. And I've been with clients who cried. They're the ones that tell me they're never going to stop crying. They sometimes make it 5 minutes. But if you really can let yourself do that, then a feeling will dissipate. So let's get back to stress. We started out with stress is bad. Oh, I want to stop here just for a minute though. Scott or Charlie, could you turn the lights in the back of the room on? Oh, other way, there we go. There we go, okay. So first of all, I want to stop for a minute. Are there any questions or comments anybody would like to make now? I'm trying to get you involved, yeah. Yeah, Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. He wrote a very, very famous book that these quotes come from called Man's Search for Meaning. And he developed a kind of therapy called logotherapy, which was instead of your, you survived the Holocaust, isn't that great, or wasn't that terrible? You look for meaning in your life. That's what logotherapy is. And anybody, I highly recommend Man's Search for Meaning. It's an old classic book. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I've heard that, especially from like my male clients, it's like, I feel this anger, I just like, if I just hit the pillow, I won't hit my dad.
Right.
Or I won't hit my son.
Right.
So like,
Yeah.
release that anger. What do you think?
Anger is really the hardest one. So the question really is, what about hitting the pillow? Studies over and over have shown that if you really start whamming on something, you're going to make yourself angrier. Now, partially that probably depends, and I haven't seen these studies. This thought just came to my mind with that really good question, that if you're pretending that pillow is the person you're angry at, that's not going to work, right? Because you're feeding the feeling. That terrible person, I'm going to get him, I'm going to get him, and I'm going to get him. But if it's like, I'm expressing anger, I'm expressing anger. I imagine, again, it would be the same way. I don't know the studies, though. That would be interesting. You could hit the pillow, but without thinking it's somebody else. Might be something to suggest to them.
I often think of, I don't know, sort of out there, so it's like if you have a full cup and somebody bumps into you, and it's like, you just spill the tea because the cup was full or because the person bumped into you.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
the same thing with like anger. So somebody bumps into you, you get upset
Right.
immediately because you've been holding in for all this anger the whole time. Maybe you're feeling, right on that level of being upset or having those negative thoughts. Whereas if you fill in that space that you were talking about, more positive thoughts.
Yeah.
Somebody bumps into you, it's like, oh, sorry.
Right. Yeah. I'm trying to train my traffic vigilante because she will think when somebody cuts in front of her in traffic, that idiot. She'll say worse words than that. But anyway, she'll want to flip a finger at them. And so what I've been trying to do, and it's really helping a lot, I'm a lot better driver than I used to be, is that somebody cuts in front of me and I think, they must be really stressed. Or maybe they're on the way to the hospital to visit somebody who's dying and they're late. So I make up a different story about it. That is one that's like, oh, okay. The one that really works for me is thinking, we're all trying to get someplace. We're all in this together. And, you were kind of rude to me, but that's okay. I was recently caught in football traffic. Okay, so I'm trying to get across Ferry Street Bridge. Football game, I guess, has just gotten out, and I come around the corner on Franklin, and the Ferry Street Bridge is blocked. So I managed to sneak around and think I'll get down on 6th Street and go across the Washington Jefferson Bridge, right? Smart. Well, who isn't thinking that, right? So I find myself in this mindless state of driving with my hands clenched on the steering wheel, and I get over into the right lane because I know I'm going to need that right lane, right? And I'm right, and I find my whole body stressed. I'm very mindless because I'm just tired. I didn't want to hit this football traffic, all of that stuff. And somebody who's right beside me just comes over into my lane. And I just had one of these horrible old responses like I used to have, wanting to flip the finger at him. I wanted to do all kinds of stuff. The worst I did was I honked my horn. But I realized how quickly I could go back to that state. I sometimes drive across the Ferry Street Bridge purposely practicing mindfulness. Like, I don't want to cross the bridge right now. I have to cross that bridge a lot. I live in north of the river. My daughter lives south of the river. I have to practice. Okay, this time when I cross the bridge, it's going to be mindfully. I'm going to be aware of the state my body is in, what the traffic is in, what my mind is thinking, and it changes the experience. So that's the important thing. Yeah. Any other questions? That was a great one. Thank you. I came up with an insight. I'm going to look and see if I can find those studies. Anybody else? Yeah.
You're in a close calls report, and then you spend the following time figuring out how you can avoid that in the future. What is that?
So something happened and you want to try to avoid it in the future?
Yeah, so I'm not really angry. I'm like worried. I want it.
Okay.
I don't want this to happen ever again. So
Right.
I'm
Okay.
trying to figure out a way to avoid it.
Yeah, great question. I'm not telling you not to think. Okay. Thinking is really useful. I hope you all do it much of the time. But it's this kind of negative you get caught up in your mind rather than watching it. There's one of the spiritual teachers in India talks about, if you cut off your arm, would you still be you? Would you? What if you lost both legs? Would you still be you? Maybe you lose both arms and both legs. Are you still you? What if somebody takes your thoughts away? Are you still you? Yeah, you are. You're the observer of your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. Think of a jelly donut right now. You know this powdery one with that gooey red stuff inside? You can think of it, right? Everybody got that? Are you that thought? No. Why would you be the thought that says, I'm an idiot? You're not that thought. You can watch those thoughts and you can use them. I once woke up, I tell people this story a couple of years ago, middle of the night, bad night, woke up in the middle of the night, this thought came to me. You're just a useless old woman. I laughed. What a terrible thought. Where the hell did that come from? I wasn't that thought. I didn't have to agree with that thought. Right? But then, when I was preparing this talk, I thought a lot. Right? I'm not those thoughts either, but it's whether your mind is using you or you're using your mind. What I'm proposing is that you use your mind. When we're in the mindless state, our thoughts are using us. Does that make sense to everyone? You're not your thoughts. You have thoughts. You could think something right now. You could think you're an idiot. Everybody say to yourself, I'm an idiot. You think, is that who you are? No, I just told you to think that. Okay? So just, does that help answer your question? Yeah, you want to be able to plan how things might be different. But if you're in the state of, if I'm in the state of that traffic jam and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is awful. Next time I have to make sure to do X, Y, and Z, I'm just going to get myself more and more wrecked. Now that one was unavoidable, but anytime there's a football game, my husband tells me, he writes it down, this is when the home football game is, because he knows what I will do. So I avoid the traffic then. I don't need to put myself in football traffic. Just driving across the Ferry Street Bridge is enough for me. Does that make sense? Did I address your question at all? Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I was victimized quite a bit. But as I grew older, I shifted the focus to, I think a lot of people do that. They end up being ER doctors and soldiers. And my first reaction in an accident is to get out, to be hurt, to help. And that's the kind of way I respond to most traumatic situations, is to take charge.
Tend and befriend.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah. Often we do that. Lots of times people will take a career. Lots of trauma psychologists, trauma therapists, guess what? They're trauma survivors. Because they're called to that work to make meaning not only of other people's lives, but their own. Yeah. Beautiful example. Thank you. Just, yeah.
Looking analytically at the problem to see what you could do to solve it versus just telling yourself the story of the victim.
Right. Okay. Yeah, good question. I mean, good answer. There's a difference between just telling yourself a story about what just happened and thinking a little more analytically. Yeah. You know, it's true. It's true. I'm a feeling type. You're probably a thinking type, right? But the same thing is going to apply. I can still think, even though I'm a feeling type. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with analytical thinking. Right. Yeah. There is a problem with telling yourself all the same old stories all the time. Any other comments? These are great questions, by the way.
Well, I was thinking, like, to me, that's resilience, because what you're doing is you're defending yourself by thinking of other solutions. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that creates resilience, and I'll talk about that. Yeah, in a minute. Yeah. Yeah, right. Clarice.
Oh, yeah. I used to drive, when I was driving to work, I would be behind and get stuck by multiple school buses, and I would get upset. And finally, it dawned on me that if I start praying and blessing the kids, the teachers, the school bus driver, give some prayers for protection and all of that, now I get to the point where I love being behind a school bus.
Okay.
You know, I mean, so then I have to get a little bit more time to my day to get where I'm going. But I'm like, and you know, good nutrition and everything. But I think it is changing that mindset.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great example. I do that when an ambulance comes by.
Right.
And stops me. It's like I pray for the people. I'm also glad that it's not going for me. So these are great examples. You're a great group, really. I should let you talk more often. Yeah.
Question. I don't really how to phrase it very well, but I've made myself busy reading one or two philosophers who say that something like there is no ultimate absolute reality. All that we have is our perception.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna get me into quantum mechanics. Watch out. I was just watching a 3-hour video today on quantum mechanics, which I'm sort of weird that way. See, I can think. Yeah. It's true that if you have an incident that happens and you ask the witnesses what happened, you're going to get a lot of different responses. People have their different perspectives. They're attending to different things, and absolute reality, I don't know. Maybe it's all relative. And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe we don't have to always concretize everything. Now, this could be my feeling type coming out. Maybe it's okay that things are going to look different to different people. And then we come together to discuss how they look different to us and come to maybe a consensus, maybe not. I guess I'm comfortable with that. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? You should look into quantum mechanics. That'll really confuse your mind. Okay. So here we are choosing our own stress response. And you've already brought some of this out here. First of all, transforming stress into a challenge. So I had to give 2 talks this week. I retired from the university 10 years ago. I'm out of shape. Giving 2 talks this week was pretty stressful for me. And I could sit and tell myself, I wish I had, and I did at times, I wish I hadn't done this, I shouldn't do this again. But most of the time I could think, boy, this has really brought my mind back into focus in ways that it hasn't been for a while. This is a really nice challenge. And so if something stressful happens, let's say you have a fight with someone, it's like, that's a challenge. How can I deal with this better in the future? How can I listen better to this person? So looking at stress as a challenge rather than this terrible thing that happened to you is one way we can choose our stress response differently, and you've alluded to that. The other is embrace anxiety. There is very little difference in the physiological response underlying anxiety and excitement, right? I mean, the same kind of blood pressure changes, the same kind of heart rate changes, the same kind of hormonal changes. And so if you're thinking about, you really love theme parks and you're getting ready to go a theme park and you're ready to go on the big roller coaster and that really excites you, that feels great, doesn't it? Isn't that excitement nice? But what if you have to get up and give a talk in front of 500 people? Oh, I'm anxious. It's the same body response. Maybe I'm excited about giving this talk rather than stressed out by it. And it's okay, again, like all the other feelings, it's okay to be anxious. I'm feeling really anxious. I alluded to the fact that in my former life, I was a professional flute player. And I remember one point I was supposed to give this concert. And I was so nervous. It was a really difficult piece. People were bringing their scores to look at while we were playing and all of this stuff. So I really went towards self-hypnosis and I did all the stuff to calm myself down. And during the performance, I was totally calm and I was completely bored. And I thought, I'm never going to do that again. I need a certain amount of anxiety. That the stress response can be awful. It can be too much anxiety, but oh, I need a certain amount of anxiety. I need a certain amount that gives me energy to perform at my best. So don't feel anxious about being anxious. Yeah, Barbara Streisand. Many good performers have terrible stage fright. And as I say, the one time that I managed to not have it was really awful. And so after that, I was very sure not to do any of that stuff to calm myself down. I don't want to be super anxious, because one bad thing about being a flute player is the worst symptom of anxiety is a dry mouth. Try playing a flute with a dry mouth, really not good. So I would imagine sucking on a lemon. Seemed to work. Or the other thing that worked was sometimes trying to make my mouth drier. That would help too. Because when we try to inhibit something in ourselves, there's a fight against it. If we can just let it be. So let yourself be anxious. Like Catherine, the person I was telling you about with the panic attacks. When she learned to let herself have panic attacks, they went away. She was no longer anxious about the anxiety. The other thing is with depression. People get depressed about being depressed. Depression's a normal dark passage that often we have in our lives. Sometimes it's not normal, but it can be for many of us, the dark passage. Okay, that's what it is. Be very, very kind to yourself, but don't get depressed about being depressed. Just be sad, be down, let yourself be blue. If it goes on a long time or it gets particularly bad, you want to reach out for help, but don't get depressed about it, okay? Don't tell yourself you're crazy. So, another bunch of studies that were done was just writing. And there was one study that was done with college freshmen who, being a college freshman is really hard, especially at a big university. You're thrown from a little high school into a big university. And students often feel that they don't fit in. Everybody else seems to fit in, but I don't fit in. Anybody ever have that feeling? Yeah. Well, it turns out in many settings, most people are having that feeling, but they're not sharing it. So you look around and they look like they're doing okay. Now, you forget that those people are looking at you and say, you're looking like you're doing okay, right? And so in this one particular intervention, they had students do writing about feeling like that they don't fit in, and also writing about their values and goals, about what they wanted to do, why this college education was important to them. And so and all they did was write about it. They weren't given any feedback on it, they just wrote about it. And those same students, they had, of course, a control group and a group that did the writing. The group that did the writing at the end of the year had fewer health center visits and higher grades than the other group of students. It's because they'd written about it. They'd given meaning to their experience. And that's one of the things that what so-called stress can do, is can make our lives meaningful. Go back to the idea of eustress and distress. You know, that we can make distress into eustress. And perhaps it's not a stressor, perhaps it's just a challenge that you need, that will, as you rise to it, will help you. And the other thing is back to the oxytocin, is it connecting and creating community. That if there's a lot of stress, what do? We reach out to each other. I even noticed during the pandemic, I did a lot of walking during the pandemic. And there would be people who would come to their front doors, and we'd be, 50 feet away from each other saying hello, right? Just reaching out to a stranger walking by on the street. How are you doing? So these stressful situations can really create community. The recent hurricanes, we saw people in Asheville really reaching out and really trying to rebuild that sense of community. And that is also a stress response. So we can create our own stress response. Can you think of any other stress responses you might create that would be useful for you? It's not a trick question. Yeah. Empathy. Well, that's part of course creating community. Yeah. Having empathy for people who are like you. The other thing as a psychologist, I can tell you from working with many, many clients is that you're not alone. That I can tell you that anything that you've had happen to you or any kind of feeling that you've had or you felt estranged or you felt like nobody else was suffering from this is deadhead wrong. Everybody suffers. And realizing that you're suffering, you're in pain, you're not suffering because you're not resisting it, you're having a bad time, and reaching out to others can really help them as well. So really good one, yeah. So let's end with with changing our mindset about stress. So perhaps, given what we've talked about today, that experiencing stress can enhance your performance and productivity. Perhaps experiencing stress improves your health and vitality. Perhaps it facilitates learning and growth. And maybe the effects of stress are positive and we should realize them. So back to our songs. Right? We've looked at stress from both sides now. I'm not saying you want to have a stress-free life, and I'm not saying you want to chase after a very stressful life, but there are two ways to look at stress. The stress that you can avoid, that you know you're overreactive to, and maybe you're overreactive to it today. So sometimes I don't do my exercise driving across the Ferry Street Bridge. I know I'm not in the state to do that, but there are other times when I do. Okay? So it can be something to avoid, but it can also be something to embrace, depending on what the situation is. Okay, that's all I have to say. Are there any questions or comments? Thank you. I'm stressed out. I'm good.
Are your palms sweating?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so are there any, we have just a few more minutes left. Scott, what's going to be next week?
It's an open forum and then cooking demonstration by Debbie.
Okay, so an open forum is, open time to ask any questions that you want, and we'll have fun trying to answer them. And cooking demonstration is always fun, especially if you're in person and you get to share. Any other thoughts from anyone? Anybody who's had some successes or anybody who's having any difficulty that they care to share?
Nope. There we go.
Either online or in the room? Yes.
They used to say things like, "Oh, you're getting up there in years, you gotta take it easy." Now they say things like, "Want stronger bones with weights."
Yeah.
Yeah, the explanation that you're just getting old doesn't sit very well with most people these days. Talking about change, we're getting a few more referrals actually from people, and we've now reached about 100 sign-ons for the Grange classes. Believe it or not, 100 people have signed on. Most of those people are either online or they're looking at the classes afterward, like archive sessions. And so we just want to remind you that you are not alone. And the group, the tribe is growing bit by bit. So we're awfully encouraged by that. We now also realize, we discussed at the board meeting, that a lot of people don't like driving at night like this. You know, this is a challenge for a number of you. who have made it here, and that when springtime and summer and fall come, the class sizes will be larger. Anyway, it's very hopeful, and we're looking for continuing change in the right direction, in good direction. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay, well, with that said, look forward to having you all back next week. We'll see you again. And the dog is
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah.
We're pretty good.
What?
Anybody who wants to help put tables up or chairs, that's nice also.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Oh, how are you? I haven't seen you in a few weeks.
I think.
I haven't seen you in a few weeks.
Huh? Okay, Edward, I think it went pretty well this time.
Maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
So we'll see how the recording actually comes out
Yeah.
from the cloud. Okay? Because we did have some issues with Wi-Fi and stuff here, but and we'll have to research that as time goes on. Anyway, well, I'm going to say good night to you all and catch you
Hello there. Yeah.
again.
Yeah.